Hi, good morning. I'm here with, why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
My name is Charles Duncan, and I'm a student at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and I'm the president of the Secular Student Alliance, and I recently converted to atheism after questioning my religious beliefs, realizing to myself that basically that the existence of God seems very improbable on both a scientific and moral level, that I decided to begin questioning God and his existence, and then eventually came to the determination that there probably is no God, and therefore live my life, in a very moral way, without, God and biblical morale, basically.
All right.
My name is Samuel Fairchild. I started the Secular Student Alliance in Angelo State University, which was one of the very few Secular Student Alliances in West Texas.
All right, you guys. Now, so we talked before about the topic of religious intolerance. You guys mentioned that you were passionate about that. I mean, have you experienced religious intolerance, and what do you want for the future? Like, what are your goals in the future?
Personally, I have experienced religious intolerance as mentioned, basically on campus. A lot of times my group will be out tabling, trying to give out information about the student organization, talking about secularism in general, and a lot of times I've seen students that will come up to us and ask us questions like, well, how do you not believe in God? Why do you not subscribe to biblical morale or anything like that? How do you basically live a moral life? And so our answer will be, we can still live morally in the absence of religious faith. And they are basically turned off to that, and they can't understand how someone can be religious without God enforcing his moral absolute, so to speak, on that person.
That's interesting. Is it hard? See, of course, as we talked about, I come from the Northeast, and religion is not as big of an issue. Is it hard to be an atheist in Texas?
Oh yeah, a lot more challenging.
Often even social suicide.
Well, coming out to family.
Yeah, that must be the. How would you define? How would you define secularism?
I define it personally as being void of any religious, superstitious, or any kind of belief that's basically reinforced by religion, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, any kind of religious faith. Just being totally void of those beliefs and just emphasizing humanistic value.
All right. I have a friend who, and I'm asking a list of questions. After September 11th and the topic of Muslim suicide bombers and how they think that they're going to get like virgins in heaven or whatever. And my friend's an atheist, and he said, those suicide bombers, they don't even get a chance to be disappointed. Now the question is, do you wish that they could be disappointed? Do you wish that either maybe there was an afterlife and they would, at least learn that they were wrong, or you know what I mean? Like, do you wish that they could be disappointed?
Translation in Greek, the original 70 virgins, and I think it was 70 grapes.
Oh, okay. So I guess that's a pretty big misunderstanding. I don't know.
Personally, I would love to see that they will be disappointed because of believing, such infantile beliefs, such as, virgins, eternal reward afterwards, all because they do something in the name of their beliefs, something so horrible as, killing someone, killing a group of people, all in the name of just getting reward after life.
Now, have you guys ruled out the possibility of a God existing? Like, could a God exist?
Certainly. Tooth fairies can exist. Zeus can exist. Gilgamesh can exist. On the scale of 1 being absolute belief in God and 10 being absolute disbelief in God, I would consider myself a 9.99. And I'm the same way when it comes to fairies or when it comes to any other outrageous claim. But I reserve my judgment for new evidence. And from a scientific perspective, that's very important. You can't just come to a concrete conclusion because that's a claim bigger than any human can make.
Did you guys ever deal personally with the fear of hell? Like, for example, you mentioned when you were questioning your beliefs, like, did you deal with either, the fear of punishment or even fear of, like, so some people say they're afraid of, like, something in their fate, if they had been in their religion, then they're going to pay for it in this life. Or, did you ever deal with anything like that?
Indeed. I've thought about it many times, questioning my beliefs before I decided to become an atheist and disbelieve in God. I would literally think, okay, if I'm questioning God's existence right now, will this result in me going to hell? Will this result in me having some type of, illness or some type of terrible thing?
Oh, really? Illness? Oh, yeah.
As inspired, by God or something like that, just due to disbelief and disobedience, so to speak. And so, yes, it's a very real fear that has caused me great distress in the past.
When we talk about the Bible, of course, by the way, did you want to say anything about that question?
I don't know. The idea of hell to me seems so patently false. Just the idea that there's eternal punishment where you go and suffer and die forever. It was obvious that hell was made for other people, whereas heaven was made for us. So even when I believed as a Christian in high school, I could tell the idea of heaven and hell were childish ideas, childish beliefs, due to address two important questions. One is, what happens when we die? And how do we deal with the anxiety of knowing about our own death? One way of saying is, don't worry about death. We've got that covered. Just believe what we say and subject your own personal autonomy a little bit, and we'll give you life eternal. Don't worry about it. As far as other people, they're going straight to hell, but only if they disagree with what we believe. I thought it was, pretty obvious that if everyone thinks that the right religion happens to be the religion that their parents believe in, or the religion that's geographically where they're born, it just made intuitive sense that was made up a la carte.
When people, sometimes people, and I'm sure you both experience this, they'll say, like, I do this moral thing because of the Bible, or I wait to have sex till marriage because of the Bible, and it's interesting because, the Bible doesn't really, like, obviously there's a lot of immoral stuff in the Bible. Like, why do you think people will, connect their morals to the Bible?
We get this all the time. So if you don't believe in God, then how do you know right from wrong? Well, Sitchin says it's an insult to our deepest integrity to say that we wouldn't know right from a wrong action unless it was dictated by a divine being. Of course we know right from wrong. We experience obligations towards each other. And as humanists, we value the relativistic idea that what I would appreciate or what I value as good treatment, someone else might as well. So we owe each other civility. It's a horrible, cretinous combination of injunction and compulsion. We say, do right because God says so, and if you don't, you'll go to hell. Whereas, from a humanist perspective, we do right because our internal selves are watching our behavior and we'll value if we did too much badly. It's conscience.
Exactly, and I remember reading a quote recently, I forget the actual author of this quote, but basically stating that in order to do good things, the fear of either eternal damnation or eternal reward as the basis of making a right or wrong decision is definitely not a good driving force, and would basically mean we're a sorry lot indeed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's see. Do you still want to maintain religious freedom for society?
Certainly.
Have you ever thought that it would be, and obviously this wouldn't work with the laws, but hypothetically, if we could make it that you couldn't teach a child religious beliefs until they were 21, do you think that would be beneficial?
Personally, I think it would be the public outcry of the religious right in this country would definitely think otherwise, but it would be wise for people to make their own decisions, especially after they are old enough to think these things for themselves, to come to their own conclusion of what their own belief system is before they have it forced upon them.
I think you hit a really good idea. If we were to suspend the introduction of religious belief after the age of reason, we probably wouldn't have religion. Especially someone who's read the Greek myths or any other religious history, world history, and then they're introduced to the Bible and they think virgin birth, immaculate conception, raised from the dead, had prophets. I've read this before. I've seen this story before, and of course, children, the indoctrination of children, gets nailed right on the head because you got to get young, and if you don't, then those secularists will get to them, and then they'll be,
Do you guys think that things are getting better or worse for the world? Like, for example, it does seem as time goes on that there are more secular people and there's more free thinking and there's more logic, and we have figures like Richard Dawkins and everything. But at the same time, there are countries like Pakistan and Iran that have maybe 100 millions of people, and they're kind of indoctrinating them at a very young age with some very intolerant beliefs. I mean, so do you guys think that things are getting better or worse?
Personally, it depends on where you live in the world. In Western society, I believe things are overall getting better in terms of growing secularization. But then you have in these other countries, especially in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, where children are literally forced to believe, Islam is the way.
Yes.
To personally believe that acts of goodwill to God, Allah, are basically defined as going and forcing people to convert at the sword, so to speak, is not good, intolerant, and definitely shows some regression in society.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme. If only we could go back to the Victorian era and things would be better. We need to have family values. That's a sentiment. Everybody thinks that their generation is going to hell in a handbasket. Steven Pinker makes a really good point in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, that in the state of nature 10,000 years ago, after we had evolved, but before the agricultural revolution, 1 in 11 people would have died on average a violent death. Because if you consider ourselves a species that evolved in between 250,000 years ago up to the agricultural revolution, there were warring tribes that killed each other and stole each other's children and raped and pillaged because they were, groups that fought over territory, fought over women, and had in-group versus out-group beliefs, and that was the identity. So, from a bottom-up point of view, of course that still occurs today, but to say that Muslim countries are still perpetuating dangerous and terrible and intolerant beliefs, yes, there's a lot of truth to that, and I think there's a lot of blame on the left to excuse the very perpetrators, like you hear when you try to say that radical Islam is the cause of all the terrorist attacks today. But at the same time, you have no reason to forget or no right to forget how the Christian religion behaved when it was in power. Crusades with inquisitions, with witch hunts and burnings and trials, and not to mention the innumerable civil encroachments on minorities or on other religions, even in this country. Slavery. It seems to me that the religion, especially Christian religion, is always the last one to jump on the train of progression. In the witch trials, they said, perhaps we've killed a little bit too many of our own and we should stop. But the church said, no, we need more burnings, we need more witch hunts. And whenever the civil rights came along and the church was all alone, left on its last, bastion of saying that, slavery is okay, or Jim Crow laws are in the Bible and we should do this, and then the Civil Rights Act came along, and just in time, God's revelation, right before, the legal action was, perhaps we should say that black people are people after all. And it's patterned throughout history. The religious are always the last people to reverse course on something involving civil rights or equal rights or equality or tolerance or open-mindedness. And there's really good reason for that, because the Bible and other religious writings are very in-group, very close-minded, very narrow-minded, intolerant, and unaccepting, by definition, dogmatic beliefs.
When we think about the possibility of there being an afterlife, now obviously as you guys as atheists, you probably think that when you're dead, that's it and you're dead, but Does part of the possibility of there being an afterlife seem appealing, especially when someone passes away, maybe younger than we think they should and everything, when there's a tragedy? Like, the possibility that they go to a heaven and live on, does that seem appealing at all? Like, do you see the logic in believing that?
It is particularly comforting if you were to subscribe to that and believe that there's heaven afterwards, that you'll have a great reunion in the sky, so to speak, with your lost family members. Even for some people who believe their dogs and cats go to heaven.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, there's a lot of things that I would love to believe. I would love to believe that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and have all kinds of self-discipline to be able to read and write and start my career and all these things. But wishful thinking is a good reason to be extra skeptical for your own bias. If we wish something to be true, then that's a really good reason for ourselves to look out for bias, look out for confirmation bias. That's how I operate.
Yeah. Are Christian nations more accepting of atheism? I mean, I obviously, the UK and the USA is probably more accepting than, say, a Saudi Arabia,
Certainly, apostasy is punishable by death, according to my belief.
Yeah, so I guess we could give the Christian nation some credit in that regard.
Well, the Bible says that blasphemy is punishable by death. It's the only unforgivable sin, but it's not actively enforced like it is.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thanks a lot to our secular democracy. The Constitution only mentions God whenever it's limits him and his power.
Do you ever think without punishment in an afterlife that maybe someone could commit a crime and then they could get away with it? Like for example, I mean, a lot of murders go unsolved, and if there's no heaven or hell or judgment, then that person kind of got away with it.
In that regard, then it would just be if there was no punishment after death, then they could get away with their beliefs that they can do whatever they want. However, there is a seemingly moral code that is inherent to most societies, and that is evolutionarily driven, based off the fact that people do choose to be moral, and there's other species where there's been plenty of evidence that they can be moral, have moral judgments, even be altruistic, and that is inherent, genetically speaking, for the survival value for humans as well as other species.
Do you wish everyone was an atheist?
No. I remember very vividly the moment that Richard Dawkins heard Christopher Hitchens answer that question. He said, if you could, would you get rid of all religion and wipe it all out completely? And Christopher Hitchens said no, and Dawkins was like,
Yeah.
But he had a really good point. He said that he likes his shelf of evil and law as it is because, even though I was a tortured Catholic, he has a lot of conflictions with sexual repression and teachings in the church versus his own human nature. And some really good literature came out of that. And I follow his logic on that. I wouldn't want religion to be gone. Of course, I don't want people to die of horrible deaths. And what you brought up earlier of if there's no daddy in the sky watching what we do, then what's to stop us from raping and pillaging out in the street? Well, for one, that's a really bad argument for you to have because it says something about you.
Right.
That you're an idea of God away from doing whatever you want to do. Which I don't take that view. I respect human life as it is, as a humanist. But another argument can be made that a good person, in general, will do a good thing. A bad person will do bad things. But to get a good person to do a bad thing, for that you need religion. And if you think about it for a little bit, the most horrible atrocities are committed by people who say, pardon my humility, but I happen to be on a mission for God.
Well, at this stage, I allow you guys to ask me any questions if you want.
Do you believe in God?
I am not sure, but the phrase God in general, which is not the God of any scripture, but just maybe that there's a spirit or something that sent us into that set the Big Bang in motion. I'd say that I do believe in it, but I am skeptical and I'm reading, and we'll see where that goes.
Okay. So your definition of God wouldn't be the Judeo-Christian version?
No, it would not.
So by the definition of the Bible as a Christian being one who accepts Christ as the blood sacrifice for the sins which you are necessarily born into shame and sin, you wouldn't fit the definition of a Christian.
What's interesting about that question is that a lot of Christians today, like